Hello, friends. Welcome to season 2 of the Broken Open podcast. I'm Maureen Towns, author, speaker, and expert on finding calm amidst the chaos of helping those you love with mental health and addictions issues. If you like what you hear on this podcast, please be sure to subscribe so that you're the first to know when new episodes are released. And visit MaureenTowns.com to get in touch to stay current on our programs, as well as any updates on the book Broken Open. Enjoy the show. Hi, Jean. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on the podcast. We met a few weeks ago when I was a guest on your podcast, which was um, amazing. So thanks for having me on.
Oh, thank you for being there.
And I'm anxious for you to tell us your story. I know that you do tell your story on different platforms. Your podcast isn't one of them, so I'm hoping that you will. Let's go into your story on my podcast. How's that?
Okay, sure.
Okay. Okay.
Well, I'll introduce myself. I'm Jean McCarthy, and I live in Alberta, Canada. I'm 53, about to turn 54, I think, anyway. I'm at the age where you're not exactly sure how old you are.
Yeah.
If William Shatner is 90, I don't know how old that makes me, but I'm struggling with that today. I am in recovery. So for me, being in recovery means that I haven't used alcohol in over a decade now. And I'm also sober from drugs, but I just never was a drug user. So for me, that's what sobriety means, is no drugs, no alcohol. But I don't know. I feel like I shouldn't get any points for the no drugs because it was not my thing.
Okay.
So my position really in the recovery community is as an advocate. I hold space for people to tell their stories, because for me, telling my story about recovery since my very first day of sobriety, which I did in my blog, was so powerful
Mm,
that I wanted to be part of holding space for other people.
mm,
Telling our stories is powerful. Hearing other stories is powerful. This is a really important piece of recovery. And when we make that happen for each other, we're really giving service. We're helping ourselves, and we're paying it forward too. So my story is pretty simple. You know what? I fall into that demographic of like working mom who 3 kids, business, house, trying to do all the things, keeping everything up in the air. And I started leaning on alcohol to fall asleep at night.
mhm,
And it worked really good at first, a nice glass of wine before bed. I called it the brick on my head. I would put that brick on my head so I could quickly fall asleep
mhm,
and get up at 6:30 and do it all over again the next day.
mhm,
And over the course of a decade, that became a bigger glass of wine. It
mhm.
became multiple glasses of wine. It became not a bedtime thing, but an evening thing, and then a while cooking supper thing, and then a looking at my watch, waiting to leave work kind of thing. And
Mhm,
it really was no longer a solution. It was a problem of its own.
mhm,
And people didn't see that because I was in that lifestyle of really feeling like I had to hustle for my worthiness. And I think there was a lot going on for me. Um, a lot of feelings of being an imposter,
mhm,
not really deserving my life, not being competent at all the things that I was doing so well. Somehow I was just fooling the world. And so alcohol became really a bigger and bigger mm, uh, comfort.
mhm,
And after a while, it becomes the only comfort. Your your brain in a cycle of addiction, um, it forgets all the other things you enjoy.
mm,
And so it becomes the only thing you want when there's something to celebrate, the only thing you want when there's something to be consoled. Any emotion becomes kind of a knee-jerk call for alcohol. And then there's the simple fact that the more you drink, the shorter the lifespan, I guess, of the withdrawal cycle.
Mhm.
So my body was, as I said at first, used to a little wine to fall asleep. But, towards the end of a decade, I would start to, no matter, every morning I woke up and said, I'm not going to drink today. But by golly, by lunchtime, something would happen. Something good would happen. And I'd think, oh, I might have to drink tonight. We're going to have company. Oh,
Mhm.
something really good happened today. I'm going to want to celebrate.
Mhm.
Oh, somebody offended me. Can't wait to get home and have a glass of wine.
Mhm.
And then, but I'd still think, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. And then by 2 o'clock, I would really, really start to be thinking about that glass of wine. And now I look back and think, yeah, because the withdrawal was starting, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
My body, it didn't feel like withdrawal. I looked like, a fine, upstanding human being at my desk doing my work. But the fact is, our bodies are pretty predictable and we have very predictable responses to these things. And so that's what was unfolding in my life.
Mhm.
And in my mind, I could give it all kinds of other names. I wanted it to be anything but the alcohol because I
Mhm.
really didn't want to quit that. I really thought that was working for me.
Mhm.
And I liked how it looked socially and I liked how it felt. There's probably also another aspect of it that I was just thinking about the other day, which is that I live in Lethbridge, Alberta, which has a really high population of Mormons.
Mhm.
And so, socially, just having grown up here, being a wine drinker socially or just a social drinker was kind of a symbol that you were part of the other part of this community,
Got it. Mhm.
And so if you meet someone new and they see that you're a non-drinker, they might just assume that you're Mormon, which nothing against Mormons. It's just that that comes with a whole lot of other assumptions about
Mhm.
your social life and your connections and your willingness to engage in I don't know, like just your time,
Mhm.
your time. I mean,
Yep.
they're busy people.
Yep.
So, so I think my identity was like, it was important to me in a lot of ways. And then over time, I just, it just couldn't be ignored anymore. And like I said, I was waking up every day thinking I'm not going to drink today. And then, every day I was disappointing myself.
Mhm.
And sometimes I could get a day, 2 days, never 3 days, like rarely 3 days. And then I started doing the online quizzes, the Am I an Alcoholic
Mhm.
quizzes. And
Yep.
so I would put in the absolute minimum amount.
Yeah.
And then I'd think, oh, well, okay, what if I tried this quiz again with how much I actually drink, and then it would put me in the tippy top, like red flag category, the high risk category.
Mhm.
And like I said, I wasn't showing signs to, even my husband didn't know really there was anything going on with
Mhm.
me. I mean, he knew I drank wine every night, but he didn't really know how much. And he didn't know that I couldn't stop.
Mhm.
And my kids weren't really aware I wasn't having a lot of consequences. And yet, even so, when I would honestly record how much I was drinking, that was high risk. That's too much. And so all of these little seeds started to get planted. And I thought, okay, I'm trying to quit. I can't quit. I'm trying to cut back. I'm drinking more. I'm thinking about it all the time. I was hiding alcohol. I was hiding how much I was drinking. Um, Tons of anxiety, and then seeing this evidence that that I was really drinking in a high risk way that I couldn't seem to get out of.
Mhm.
And then one day it just kind of hit me out of the blue. It was really like I don't know if it came from outside of me or inside of me. I said I was either like all of those little red flags kind of burst inside of me, or maybe it was, a God shot from the universe. But I just sort of had this very powerful awakening and awareness that what I was engaged in was really getting worse, not better,
Mhm.
and that it's something that leads into death.
Mhm.
And even though that wasn't in my near future,
Mhm.
um, that's where it takes you. And really, there's an expression that people in 12-step groups say, which is alcohol wants you dead, but it'll settle for making you miserable.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. And I was starting to feel pretty miserable, but what I was really afraid of, and and kind of hyper focused on was, what was my bottom going to be?
Yeah.
Was I going to crash my car? Was I going to lose my license? Was I going to embarrass myself at work? Like, what was this rock bottom going to be? I wasn't having it yet, but I was starting to get really afraid of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then this feeling came over me one day that was just, like I said, an awareness of, I can just quit. This is going to kill me. I don't need to ruin my life. I don't, you don't need to smoke a pack of cigarettes a day to quit smoking. You can just quit smoking.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need something terrible to happen for me to stop. And I don't even need to call myself an alcoholic if I don't want to. I can just quit.
Mm-hmm.
But what I really knew was that I had to quit. I couldn't cut back. I couldn't moderate. I couldn't control. Quitting was really the only option. And so that's what I did. And then I started blogging that first day because I was scared to tell anyone.
Mm-hmm.
I was scared to tell my husband because I thought he might tell me, "You're fine. You can drink." And I knew I would if someone told me that.
Yeah, lots of people would question it.
Sure. And I think our friends are well-meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And because if someone isn't in that cycle, they can't fathom how hard it is to quit.
Mm-hmm.
People want to cut back, they cut back. If you're not
Mm-hmm.
addicted, that's pretty easy.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'd already had that experience because, 4 drinks in with my friends, and I'd think, I drink too much.
Mm-hmm.
And my friends would say, "You're not an alcoholic. If you're an alcoholic, we're alcoholics."
Yeah.
And well,
Yeah.
that's not the time to have that conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't tell anybody. I also, though, was afraid to go to a recovery meeting
Mm-hmm.
because I was very afraid that someone would tell me, "You're not bad enough to be
Yeah.
here."
They might have.
Well, I guess it depends on what meeting you go to, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Because it just depends on who's in the room. I mean,
Yes.
I do go to 12-step meetings now. I didn't start until I was 8 years sober. I just wanted to be around some other women who got it. And they're so accepting and lovely and open-minded that it's a really good fit. But my fear was if anyone gave me an out, I might have taken it.
Yep. Yep. I get you.
So, yeah. So instead, I started a blog and I thought, I'm just going to write about this anonymously. And if one person sees it, I knew I would be able to see stats. And I didn't expect very many people to see it. I didn't actually understand how blogs worked. I knew enough to get it set up, but not really. I'd never done it before. So, and I also thought, well, this will be interesting. I'll write about this for a few months. And then when I'm fixed in a few
Yeah.
months, I'll have this body of writing about what it was like. And maybe Chatelaine will publish an article
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
something. Because I thought this is so unusual, to be
Yeah.
high functioning. Well, guess it's not unusual.
No.
Not unusual, not that particularly interesting. And also 10 years later, I'm sober. That hasn't really been a problem. But you're never done working on yourself. Like it certainly wasn't fixed in a few months.
No, absolutely not. And I hear what you're saying. Like it's not that unique a story. I think what's unique is that you've really done some in-depth analysis of what happened.
Yeah.
Um, and that you decided to change before you had huge consequences. That seems unusual to me.
Well, I think it's becoming more and more common.
Okay.
And we have the information age to thank for that.
Yeah.
So, my take on this, having spent the last decade kind of engaged in the recovery community and listening to people's stories and being kind of a aggregator of stories, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, I think that in the past, before the days of the internet, and particularly the internet plus this generation, the younger generation that just lives out loud,
Hmm.
um, you really did hit rock bottom because if we think about those stages of change, pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, and then action,
Hmm.
going to a meeting is an action.
Hmm.
And so you have to be pretty well motivated to move from contemplation, preparation to action.
Hmm.
And like I said, I was not going to a 12-step meeting. There was no way. I
Hmm.
mean, I really thought the only way I'll go is if I can't do this on my own. Then I would go. That would mean I was out of options.
Hmm.
but I had all this information I could find online, even just those quizzes, right?
Mhm.
And so being able to identify that I was in a high risk category, and being able to search different philosophies of recovery and different pathways to recovery, and being able to write about it and find support through the online community.
Mhm.
So because of things like this, I think that people are getting more information in that earlier stage of transition, in that earlier stage of change.
Mhm.
In the contemplation preparation stage, you can
Mhm.
anonymously sit at your computer and do some searches and find out more information
Mhm.
versus uh, talking to your doctor or going to a meeting. Now,
Mhm.
those are still good things and
Mhm.
people do them.
Yeah.
All I mean is that without this option of doing this independent, anonymous, private research in your own home, well, then you carry on in your activity until you're ready to reach out and
Mhm.
tell another person.
Mhm.
And so the information is reaching people earlier in their trajectory. And I think that is empowering them to make changes earlier on. So I believe that we are seeing a whole lot more people find recovery
Mhm.
earlier, and find support in different ways,
Mhm.
and being able to really self-manage their recovery in more of like a patchwork versus really engaging in one program
Yes.
that may or may not be the right fit for them.
Yes.
And so there's a lot more self-advocacy,
Mhm.
and there's a lot more just ability to find what you need and make connections,
Mhm.
and reach out and have conversations like we're having right now. I mean,
Mhm.
the pre-internet, you and I would never have met. We would never have had the experience to hear each other's stories or talk to each other in this way, and also at the same time share it with other people.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
the internet, for all the negative things that we talk about social media and the internet, this is one of the beautiful things that's happening, is that it is literally saving lives and changing lives.
It is, and I like the slant that you're taking on it, and I appreciate it. I appreciate you pointing it out. Where my mind goes is the other thing that the internet is doing is normalizing problem drinking for a lot of people as well. I see a lot of memes out there, it's wine o'clock.
Mhm,
Wine is
mhm.
mommy juice. You deserve it. I love you to the liquor store and back. Like a lot of making light of
Yeah.
compulsive drinking.
Mhm.
And um, but I love what you're saying because you're right. There is a tipping of the scale. And I think a lot more people are starting to recognize, especially with COVID, we've got a problem that's
Yeah.
this far below the surface at normal
Yeah.
times. And now everything's starting to bubble up. And whoa, what is this mental health we speak of? And what are the components of coping and resilience? And what are these feelings that I'm having? This is weird. What is this? I have to slow down and feel things. I don't like that. So yeah,
Yeah, and those don't look as good on the Instagram, right? Like those aren't as pretty for the highlight reel that we portray to the world.
it's true.
So there's a lot of pressure, I think, to have a perfect looking life on the outside.
There is, but I am seeing people like, I mean, I just saw a post today from someone who I know has struggled with mental health for probably 10 to 15 years, fairly seriously. First post I've seen from this person. So I'm like, wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
I really do like the fact that mental health is on the tip of everyone's tongue right now, and we are all
Mhm.
talking about how we're doing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
optimistic. I love what you're saying about the connectivity, and you can find what you need. And tell us what you mean by patchwork recovery program, please.
So this is a phrase, I can't take credit for it. It was coined by a fellow named William White.
Okay.
And I highly recommend looking up William White because
Okay.
he has written some really fantastic white papers
Okay.
with different perspectives on recovery. So he talks about patchwork recovery as part of this new recovery advocacy is another phrase that he's coined, in that people are feeling empowered in their recovery,
Mhm.
and um, they are, I guess, thoughtfully approaching the 12-step model, which for a long time has been sort of the only way, and the the way. And it's a good way. It works really well for a lot of people, but it doesn't work for everyone.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like saying that Weight Watchers is the only way to lose weight.
Mhm.
It's a way to lose weight that works, but it doesn't work for everyone, and there's lots of other ways to do it.
Mhm.
So he coined this phrase, and it really is the idea of looking at different modalities of recovery and embracing what works for you. So for me, for example, I didn't go to a 12-step meeting, but I did search the 12 steps. Okay, what are the 12 steps,
Mhm.
and what do they mean, and why do they help?
Mhm.
And the step about taking a moral inventory, or like a searching inventory. Well, what does that mean? I didn't know what that meant, so I went a little bit deeper, and then learned that it was about examining your resentments, and then examining your role in those resentments. And right away, I thought, oh, that's interesting.
Start
I had
sharpening
a
your
lot of
pencil.
those. Yeah,
Sharpening.
exactly.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, what the heck does that have to do with my drinking?
Mhm.
I honestly thought, I have got it together. Like, look at my life, guys. I've got it together. I just drink too much. I just need to fix this little piece.
Yeah.
And if you've ever built a puzzle that's like got a lot of sky in it, you get down to that last piece and you're like trying to get it in. And you're like, why doesn't this fit?
Yeah.
But you kind of have to take the whole sky apart, because it turns out there's like 13 other pieces that are almost fitting, but not quite.
Yeah.
And then, all of a sudden, oh, by golly, it works.
Yeah.
So that's really what it was for me, was that I realized that there was lots of little, that the drinking was the one thing in my life that really came up that had to be dealt with,
Yeah.
that was really um, the I don't know what you'd call it. It was sort of the indicator of other problems
Right.
that I could have gone my whole life with nobody questioning.
Mhm.
And I really thought that they were completely separate. So for instance, I had an eating disorder, undiagnosed, untreated, but as a younger woman, started in my college years, university years, and then as a young mom, that I went through these cycles of, starvation and extreme weight loss, but also binging and purging.
Mhm.
Well, I really never told anybody about that. And I never connected that had anything to do with drinking. I sort of
Mhm.
just thought it was like evidence that I was kind of a terrible person.
Interesting.
But
So
it was
lots
its
of
own thing.
shame, hey, with these behaviors
Oh,
for you.
so much. And
Yeah.
and then this other thing that I couldn't put a name on it until I was in recovery for a while, but I feel like people might identify with this, especially women.
Mhm.
Uh, if nobody else saw, it didn't exist.
Mm.
So nobody saw me binge, nobody saw me purge. Didn't happen. If the
Mhm.
doctor asked me if I did that, no way. Mm-mm. Like, I wouldn't even think I was lying. It just didn't exist.
Mm.
Right. Or uh I don't know, like, you can kind of pick your thing, like whatever thing that we do that we feel shameful about, um I don't know whether it's like how clean you keep your house, or whether or not you take your vitamins, or I don't, did you check the oil in the car? Or there's just all of these things that I think we do. When I was a kid, I sucked my thumb. I sucked my thumb way longer than was normal, way
Mhm.
longer. I started smoking so that I could quit sucking my thumb as a teenager.
Awesome.
The two overlapped for a little while there.
That's awesome.
Uh, so, but to me, I mean, it's funny that I can talk about that now. I had so much shame about that. I mean, imagine an adolescent trying to look so grown up, and just having, and how teased anyone would have been at that
Yes.
age
Yes.
if other kids knew. I mean, that's like, that's like wetting the bed, or, playing with dolls or something. Like,
Mhm.
the kids would just be merciless if they knew that. Um, so I never told anybody. And of course, my parents, if they had seen me do that, even when I was little, they would tell you not to. So you kind of learned, oh, this is shameful and bad. I need to hide it.
Mhm.
And then again, okay, I hide it. It doesn't exist. It's
Mhm.
not real.
Mhm.
This isn't real. Nobody knows this. So
Interesting.
yeah. So really what that turns out to be, as I've learned, is an offshoot of codependency, which is where codependency is really where we rely on other people to reflect our importance back to us,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So it doesn't matter to me who I think I am, only who you think I am.
Mhm.
And if you like me, then I like you. That's the
Yeah.
only prerequisite. How do I need to change myself to make you like me? Okay, I'll do
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
real shapeshifter, people pleaser.
Yeah.
And we tend to think that people pleasing is a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm a good girl people pleaser.
Yeah.
But that's honestly, that's manipulation. That's trying to make other people like you
Mhm.
by determining what you need to do to make them like you, right? So all of these things are sort of part of the same parcel of not being grounded in ourselves. And so for me, recovery wasn't just about quitting drinking. It was actually starting to be in myself, be in my
Mhm.
body, and be in my heart, and just think like, oh, what do I actually think about this?
Mhm.
And to say that, and to feel that I could actually say it. I remember telling my husband I wanted pizza one night, and now he would never say I was a wet rag, or I just went along merrily with everything.
Yeah.
But I think that I never really asked myself, what do I want? And so I would sort of ask everyone else, oh, what should we order tonight? What do you guys want? Take the consensus. And
Yeah.
I never myself really weighed in on that. And so I remember just speaking up and saying, like, I don't want Chinese food tonight. I want pizza. And being a little bit scared of like, ooh, how's that going to go?
Mm.
I mean, I was in my 40s, for goodness sake,
Mhm. Mhm.
but these little ways that
It's
we
a new
betray
skill.
ourselves.
A
Yeah,
new
it
skill for
really
you.
is. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's so many ways that we heal and
Yeah.
get real. And then to be able to say things like, I sucked my thumb when I was a kid, or I had an eating disorder, or I didn't feel worthy. I felt like I had imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
To be able to say that now is really interesting.
Mhm.
And to feel so validated within myself
Mhm.
it's new for me. It really is.
Mhm.
And I'm not always good at it. It's still kind of a new skill. I
Mhm.
sometimes will default to that other focus,
Sure.
but I have to bring myself back
Yeah.
and be authentic. So this is what I think is really the epidemic, is that women in particular, I think, are being sold this message of all the things we need to be, and we just lose ourselves. Like, we
Mhm.
don't feel safe to be authentic
Mhm.
because we're so bombarded with all of these other identity messages.
Mhm.
And frankly, with being rewarded for them.
Mhm.
This is part of the problem too.
Mhm.
Because when I was living my life that way, that was, like I say, like just so inauthentic, so lost to myself, and drinking as a consolation, drinking for comfort.
Mhm.
Um, I just, I was not really being myself. I wasn't honoring myself. And I
Mhm.
thought my world would collapse if other people knew.
I I so relate to all of that.
Right. And then
Yeah.
meanwhile, I would get awards for it. I would
Yeah.
get recognized for it. And there was just so many ways that the world tells you this is what you should do.
Yeah.
And that's very confusing. That's
Yeah.
very confusing.
Yeah, and my addiction isn't alcohol. It is, well, sugar is a big one, but also, yeah, like it is having, having myself reflected in other people, and having an influence on other people, and a
Yeah.
positive influence, and being able to fix things, and all that wrapped up into codependence for me. So I so relate to what you're saying, and I really appreciate what you're saying too, where you thought alcohol was the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought, if everything else is great, I just need to stop drinking. And that's what I'm having trouble with. But if you just dig a little bit deeper, why? Why
Yeah.
are you having trouble? Why are you compulsively drinking or sucking your thumb or, you know,
Right.
controlling your food and body weight in this way and relationships and people liking you and all of that stuff. I mean, and I'm willing to bet that since you have dug into those things and become more you and more authentic and accessible, I would imagine that you're connecting with more and more people in a very, very genuine and authentic way because it's such a common story.
Yeah. It's true. I definitely, personal relationships are just so different.
Mhm.
Honestly, I don't know if my husband and kids would say that. I think they thought things were okay
Mhm.
then,
Mhm.
and they're okay now.
Mhm.
But the saddest part was that I felt like I didn't deserve love.
Mhm.
So I had this feeling all the time. I talked about feeling like an imposter. I also felt like an imposter in my own family.
Mm.
And I thought it was only a matter of time before my husband realized he'd made a terrible mistake.
Yep.
And that he was going to, like see that I was really this unworthy person
Interesting.
and leave.
Mhm.
And not only that, but what I really realized when I started doing that deep work was that I had this white knuckle fear that my kids would do the same.
Mhm.
That, we all have that time where we start to see our parents as real people
Mhm.
and realize that they're imperfect.
Mhm.
And I really felt that when my sons got to that stage of life, that they would realize, like they would see me as human
Mhm.
and then not love me anymore.
Mm.
And it sounds silly. It
Mm-mm.
sounds like, but it's so sad. It makes me so sad. So the offshoot is that now, not only do I know that that's not going to happen, I mean, part of that is this big deal that our mind builds up to keep us drinking or doing whatever behaviors because our brain thinks that this is working. So it's
Mhm.
got to keep us doing the behavior.
Right.
But the other thing is just feeling our worth, I guess, and just realizing that that was just a story I was telling myself.
Mm.
And so I feel love. That is the best part of this, is that I'm not just more relaxed and nicer to be around. I'm actually receiving the love that used to just like bing. Like
Mhm.
you give me a compliment, jing, I deflect it.
Mhm.
By an achievement, couldn't feel it.
Mhm.
um, I would have loving interactions with my family and immediately start to fear that that would be taken away.
Mm.
So, yeah, life is just a lot gentler now.
Mhm.
But what
Mhm.
I haven't achieved yet is really being able to connect on this level in person in my own community, even after a decade. I'm starting now to go to 12-step meetings and do that in my own community face to face with people. But all of this work that I've done, and I mean, it's the thousands and thousands of people I've worked with online and
Mhm.
connected with, and hundreds of people I've interviewed for my podcast. Um, I definitely have a global presence, but not so much a local presence.
Mm.
And that still feels a little weird to me. I just ran into somebody today who I hadn't seen for 10 years. And they said, "Oh, what are you doing now? Are you still doing this?" And I was like, "No, no, not doing that anymore. Are you still doing that?" I'm like, "Nope, nope, not doing that anymore." And then they said, "What are you doing these days?" And I said, "Oh, this and that." Like,
Yeah.
we were at the pharmacy. Do you really want to get into it then?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, I'm a sober podcaster and writer now. Like, I've had a complete overhaul. So I don't quite know I'm just sort of letting it trickle into my life here
Yeah.
and just trying to embrace it when it happens. Um, and I'm sure that there's a few people that, might be kind of like titillated to, hear a juicy story of, someone who they didn't know had this other life that had
Mm.
it. I don't know. Maybe I'm making myself too important by thinking that. But, that's just a blip. That's just a blip. And I'm looking forward. I think this hopefully is my next stage, is where I really kind of integrate into my community
Yeah.
with this work and with the wholeness of who I am, and not feel worried about what people know
Yeah.
or what they think.
Well, you're getting there because I mean, I'm only a few hours away. So, so you're outing yourself in Alberta, which is pretty good. That's pretty good. Uh, That's good. That's good. It's a start. I want to talk a little bit about, I mean, you've said that you're a writer and you have a blog and you do music as well. I think I read that your intro song on your podcast, The Bubble Hour, is you. Is that right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
really good.
Thanks. So I don't really do music anymore. I was writing and recording music in the 2000s. So
Okay.
2007 and 2008. I released 2 albums in those 2 years,
Okay.
of original music that I wrote and recorded, and I was kind of doing folk gigs and stuff like that. And when I quit drinking, I really realized that if I wasn't going to reach for alcohol for comfort,
Mhm.
I needed to reduce the amount of things I did that made me so damn uncomfortable all the
Mm.
time.
Mhm.
And getting on stage was one of them. Yeah. So I really enjoyed writing music and playing music, but I didn't enjoy performing solo.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's a lot of pressure.
Mhm.
And I just decided to not do that anymore.
Mhm.
So I shifted and took my creativity more into the writing and painting
Mm.
and connecting with people online. So the music is part of my story, but it's not an ongoing part of my story.
Awesome. Well, it's still very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm glad you did a little bit of it. And you do some poetry, and I've seen little snippets of your poetry, which was fantastic. There's a line that you have. Um, this is how my pain showed up.
One of my favorites is just the girl inside.
Mm,
And it's a conversation between the part of us that's trying to hide ourselves and then the true self from the inside, like, let
mm,
me out of here, right? And that poem starts out, stay hidden, I said to the girl inside. How can I keep you safe if you laugh so loudly in a crowd?
mm,
How can I make them like you if you shine in their eyes? How can we fit in this small space I've been given if your bigness is on display? Stay hidden, I said. It's for your own good. Again, it just breaks my heart to read the things I used to think. And I mean, I wrote this poem from a place of recovery, but really went back to how it felt to be in that place where I felt like I had to lock myself inside and control.
well, there's a lot of people that grow up being told that they're too much
It's true. Yeah.
and
And
that
I
they
think we
need to
have to
just
be
be
careful
less.
how we talk to people.
And it is what leads us to this feeling that people can't handle us. We need to hide. We need to tone it down, be be more pleasing, like all the things that you described earlier. And I was tempted to ask you, and so maybe I will. This feeling of unworthiness and that you're not worthy of receiving love. Where do you think that came from?
Hmm, that's a good one. Um, no one ever told me that. I come from a very loving, affectionate family.
Hmm.
Um, but I think I was a sensitive kid and a smart kid. I think I have a high emotional intelligence.
Hmm.
And so sometimes when we're kids, we think we have things figured out and we never tell anybody that this is how we figured it out.
Hmm.
So, you know, in um in my life, I'm trying to think of an example of it, but this is a cute one. My brother-in-law, that beautiful smell after it rains?
Hmm.
My brother-in-law thought until he was an adult that that smell was worms. And so he thought that was a gross smell.
Hmm.
Well, you can see why he thought that. And you could see why something the rest of us experience as good and lovely, for him, he thought was yucky.
Hmm.
And I don't know that he, to this day, fully enjoys the smell of rain because he has this sort of old thinking attached to it. So I think for myself, I just I listened to adults be critical of each other. I think the women in my family, the aunties and my grandma, and the way that people talked about each other, and I observed a lot of criticism that was not direct.
Mhm.
And I think I internalized this message of you have to stay a step ahead of that.
Mhm.
You have to do everything right, or that's how people are going to talk about you.
Yep.
So there was that. And then, like I said, something like thumb sucking, where I knew I wasn't supposed to do it, but I did it anyway, and I felt shame about it.
Mhm.
Messages like that.
Mhm.
Um, I think there's just, I say it's like a million emotional paper cuts.
Yeah.
There was no gaping wound. There was just a lot of little misdirections.
Mhm.
And I heard someone say once, if a ship leaves port just a degree off course, it'll wind up on the wrong continent by the time it crosses the ocean.
Mhm.
So I think that's what it was, Maureen. I think I just was a little off course, and then I just kind of kept adding on to that. I did have some, I think smaller kind of traumas that then I never told anyone about,
Mhm.
and then those piled on,
Yep.
and just trying to um, make sense of the way that I understood things as a kid. So I don't think there was a way for anyone to really have prevented it. And
No, I agree with you.
we can be really high functioning in that way. And I actually think if I had turned to something else instead of alcohol, if I had turned to, I don't know, like just um, probably if my eating disorder had taken the place that alcohol took for me, I don't know that I ever would have got the help that I need.
Mm.
I think there's a lot of people out there who go very far
Mhm.
in their dysfunctional patterns
Mhm.
because the thing that they're leaning hardest on doesn't come to a head.
Yes, I agree with that. And for that reason, I think, I talk about my story. I feel very lucky that my kids brought me to a head, of having to
Yeah.
face how I cope with things and how I communicate and how I process my own feelings and who I am and am I worthy and all of those same things. And I love what you said too. You have you lots of loving home and really well-intentioned adults around. But there's a lot of messages being sent, and you're picking up on them, like putting them in a basket, that you need to split off from parts of yourself in order to be loved and accepted here.
Mhm.
No one's
Mhm.
telling you that. You're intuiting it and you're picking up on the idea that, okay, not everybody's okay. I better make sure that I am.
Yeah.
I just and so yeah, you split off parts of yourself, and there's your trauma that leads to,
Yeah.
"I think I'll have a drink.
Yeah. Yeah.
This feels better."
And it's like this feeling of I'm hurting all the time.
Yeah.
And I would never have told anybody that. I mean, I had shame
Mhm.
about hurting.
Mhm.
And I had a lot of anxiety. I still
Mhm.
do. And I would have never used that word. Anxiety is for weak people.
Mhm.
I'm strong. I have stress. That's how I looked at
Okay,
it.
yeah, yeah, got it.
Right.
Yep.
So uh, I can think of 3 different times when my family doctor suggested antidepressants or anti anxiety medication for me. And I switched doctors. I just thought, are you crazy? Like, do you know how much I do? First of all, I didn't understand how that medication worked.
Yeah.
So I thought they were talking about just sedating me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I thought, I've got soccer practice at night. Like I cannot be sedated. I need to be wound up this tight to do all the things that I do.
Yeah.
That's my spring load, right? And also, um, I felt very valid in my I wouldn't have called it anxiety, but I mean, in my hyper awareness and my
Yeah.
hypervigilance,
Yeah.
it was necessary, and it was very validated by the world. I was getting a lot of gold stars for all the things I was doing, which told me all of that was working.
Yes.
So it was very cyclical. And so once I started to learn a little bit more about recovery and mental health
Mhm.
and understanding that the things I thought were just true about me were actually things I could change. So I just thought that I was just a lesser person who
Mm-hmm.
somehow had this, through anxiety and trying harder, could sort of overcome it and do a lot of things.
Yeah.
And that I needed to do more than other people to compensate for the fact that I was not as good of a person. Like, to me, that was just true.
Interesting. Yeah.
That wasn't something that I could work on because I had that message from my childhood.
Yeah.
Not that someone ever told me that, but
Yeah.
so learning to look back on that and even just consider, wait, what if that's not true?
Yeah.
What if something else is true?
Mm.
Let's try this on for size.
Mm.
Okay, so
Takes a
smart
lot of courage.
recovery.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would look at different things. Okay, smart recovery, which is self-managed addiction recovery training, I think. So it's different than the 12-step program, different than Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, in that it's more an empowered approach,
Mm-hmm.
still abstinence based, but it's more based on CBT.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really looking at managing your thoughts, identifying your triggers, developing new behaviors, and then maintaining
Mm-hmm.
these new behaviors. So looking at that and trying some of their exercises and listening to some of their podcasts. And then that got me to challenge those old truths.
Mm.
The 12-step pathway of looking at your resentments. What's my role in those?
Mm-hmm.
So that was a new idea. What do you mean? My resentments are valid. They're real. I resent the fact that people don't drive fast enough. Wait a minute. What if I wasn't always in a hurry? Like,
Yeah.
that's my role. I left too late. Oh, okay. All
Yeah.
right. I get it. So through doing all that work, you start to challenge your old beliefs
Yeah.
and unpack the things and just realize the things that you've internalized as truth
Mm-hmm.
that are actually a perception.
Mm. That's so good. That's so good. And I want to talk about your book a little bit too. This book, I know you have more than one. You have a book of poetry as well.
Yes, I do. So we'll talk about the two books.
Okay.
We'll start with the Unpickled Holiday Survival Guide.
Yeah, you have a page in here about resentments that I actually laughed out loud, honestly, because it was so dead on. You talked about the resentment and why it's there and how to change it. I thought that was just so good. I'm trying to think of what page it was on. It was so great. But this book, so it's Unpickled Holiday Survival Guide, Staying Alcohol Free During the Festive Season. And I bought it because you said in one of your blogs that there was bits in here for family members to consider in how to support someone who's getting sober and trying to stay sober. And I thought, oh, that might be good to have a look at. And so I read your book, and it is not just for the holidays, I want to say, it's for all the time.
Yeah.
Especially now in COVID. I think that the pressure, the desire to connect is so strong that people will potentially compromise themselves to be social. And so I'll use an example. I live in this great neighborhood in Calgary, and someone waved. I'm on an eating plan for the month, which includes no alcohol. And so someone said the other day, "Come on over and have a drink with us in the yard." And I was like, I
Right?
want to come over and connect with you, but I don't want to have a drink, and I don't want to explain why I'm not having a drink, and I don't want to get into it. So I just didn't go. And I
Right.
thought,
Right.
okay, this is really interesting. And as I was reading your tips for family members, I'm reading it and I'm thinking, well, I would like that consideration too. I would like that consideration too. And what really occurred to me was I went through a separation and divorce. So my relationship has now shifted. My social status, my social relationship, the way that I like, I don't know, there's just seems to be this big stigma around couple versus single. Like you can't have an odd number of people at a party and, like weird things like that. And I thought, oh my gosh, these tips from that perspective were really great too.
Oh, that's so good. I'm glad to hear that.
Like when I
So,
approach my family dynamics at the first Easter, how are we going to celebrate this now? Because I'm
yeah,
different. The relationships are different. Everybody's kind of walking around looking at each other like, what do we do here? These are
yeah.
great, great, great tips.
Oh, thank you. I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah, it's
That is
awesome.
awesome to hear.
Yeah.
So I really think that it comes down to being considerate but how can you be considerate if you don't know how people are feeling?
Hmm.
And your neighbors had the best intentions to
Yes.
connect with you by asking that.
Yeah.
So probably, using the information in this book, what you might have picked up was you can still go take a drink with you
Hmm.
and take a refill on your drink and show up. And they don't really care what's in your cup. They
They
just want to
don't.
be a good host. And so
Yeah.
you could go for a little while, bring your own drink with you,
Yeah.
have a nice visit, leave early. You don't have to stay too long. You don't want to be responsible for getting other people home because they're probably going to want to stay longer than you,
Hmm.
and making it easy. But if they had read this book or a book like it,
Hmm.
they might have said, "Come over for a visit. We've got sangria,
Hmm.
but what else can we get for you? Or
Hmm.
bring your own drink if you don't want that, right?"
Hmm.
And then okay, this isn't alcohol conditional, this offer. They really
Yeah.
want me, not they don't really want the drink. They want
You're
a visit
right.
with me.
You're dead on. And I just, you talk about not being, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. I think I was over hungry, tired, wasn't thinking clearly. And so I just was like, I got to go inside and look after myself. But then I read your book and I wrote, Pellegrino on my grocery list and lemons and all the things that I could now use to feel like it's a special cocktail for me and I'll
Yeah.
go and visit. So I loved your prep strategies, being prepared and
Oh, awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, it's so important. One of my friends, her dad was a long time 12-step member leader. And so she had grown up, with that in her household.
Mhm.
And when I quit drinking and finally told my friends, which took a while, she said, "Okay," she said, "here's the tip. Wherever you go, you take your Diet Coke or whatever your thing is. And after a while, the people who love you will start to keep that on hand.
Mhm.
And they'll know." In the same way that they used to have the white wine that I liked, they always used to have that on hand for me. Well, now they know, oh, Jean's coming over. You got to make sure that there's some Diet Coke on hand. So you train the people that you love to have the things you want,
Mhm.
but also you make sure you have some that you bring too,
Mhm. Mhm.
so that you're never stuck without.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Sorry, I was going to ask you. I've been around people that quit drinking who are almost insistent that you drink.
yeah,
They're so worried that their sobriety is going to be a downer that it's almost like, have a glass of wine, 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 have a glass of wine. And I'm like, I just don't really want one. I got stop pushing me to have a glass of wine. I don't really want one that badly. But there's almost like an unworthiness in that. Like,
yeah. hmm Yeah. I think part of it is no one else needs to change, just me, right? So, and just I just want to blend into the background. Everything else can stay exactly the same. It's just me that needs to change. Please don't make a big deal. For God's sake, don't quit drinking just because I'm quit drinking, because then it will be an even bigger deal. And of
mm,
course, we're thinking, eh, you know, that it's going to be so hard for other people to quit drinking because it's so hard for us to quit drinking.
yeah.
Because when you can't quit, you can't imagine what it's like to be able to take it or leave it,
Hmm.
right?
That's a good point.
And I do remember some family members saying like, "Oh, I'm not drinking with you tonight," and I was kind of offended. Like,
Mm,
I don't know how to explain it, but in the beginning, it was kind of my thing. And maybe, it was my thing and it was really hard. And for other people to just be like, whoop de doo, I'm not having any. Well, maybe that felt a little too easy to me. I don't know.
Invalidating maybe, yeah,
Yeah,
like, it's just
maybe.
a
I don't
don't
know. And
pretend this is just something you can just do. Yeah.
yeah. I think there was some of that. And also I just didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't,
Yeah.
I just wanted it to not be a thing. So there's it just takes a while. And I also think that that's wrapped up in people pleasing
Yeah.
and not really being comfortable with ourselves rather than just saying, well, that's so nice of you. How thoughtful. Thank you. Right. Thanks for
Yeah.
not drinking with me. So
So I wanted to mention something on page 58 of your book. You talk about the whack-a-mole concept of transfer versus replacement. And one of the things that you clarify, you say, it's okay. It's okay to overeat a little bit, or, unless you have an eating disorder, it's okay to replace or for a little while. There's a point where it's not okay anymore, where
mhm,
the new issue is now an issue.
right.
So, can you clarify a little bit about transfer and replacement in terms
Sure.
of recovery?
Sure. I'll clarify in as much as I know as a layperson.
Okay. Okay.
But the way that I explain it in the book is that we need to find other little pleasures
Yes.
to help negate our cravings. And sugar can do that really well. A lot of people find that sugar is a really great hijack for the pleasure reward circuitry
Hmm.
for two things. It does give you that dopamine hit,
Hmm.
and it also doesn't pair that well with alcohol. So if you're really craving a drink and you have, let's say, like a little bit of chocolate or a little bit of ice cream or something sweet, a cookie, if you're hungry, it'll help you with your hunger. It'll get your blood sugar level back up. It'll hit that pleasure reward circuitry that most of us get a little high, like a pleasure hit from sugar. And it'll also confuse your palate
Hmm.
and not right. If you're having like brie, I mean, brie just calls out for some wine to go with it, or nuts or chips or something.
Yeah.
So having sugar kind of takes your palate the other direction
Hmm.
and lets your brain not feel like, oh, this would be good if only I had wine with it.
Hmm.
So that can be a really good little placeholder to get you through a moment of craving.
Hmm.
The problem happens when you're using that too much and then you become addicted to the sugar.
Hmm.
So maybe the thing to do is I do this all the time, a couple of chocolate chips and a couple of almonds. So now you've got some fiber and some protein to balance out your blood sugar,
Hmm.
because if you spike your blood sugar and then it crashes, you're just going to have another craving.
Hmm.
It feels a blood sugar crash feels a lot like an alcohol craving. We get them mixed up all the time, but if you can
Hmm.
level out your blood sugar, then you can sort of extend the tail of that fix a little bit longer. So there's a lot of things that sort of can be process addictions
Hmm.
that we can get hooked on in the same way, a similar way to an addiction to drugs or alcohol. And so those fall into the categories of sex or love addiction and gambling and shopping and eating. So there's these process addictions that look and act a lot like um, the physical addictions or the substance use disorders because they hijack that pleasure reward circuitry.
Got it.
So when you're kind of trying to find replacement behaviors, it's really good to be aware of those things so that as you're training your brain to learn other comforts, other ways to respond to comfort, that you can do things that are maybe less likely to turn into those other problems,
Hmm.
so that you're not just moving from alcohol use disorder to a gambling addiction or
Hmm.
gambling disorder, right? So some things that we can use are a little bit more physical things like touch. So putting lotion on our hands or giving ourselves a self massage of the hands or the feet, the
Hmm.
scalp, something like that. Music, breath work, meditation, the
Hmm.
the boring stuff. I mean, Like the other stuff's more exciting
Yeah.
and instantly gratifying, but we can actually train ourselves to understand a comfort response from these other things.
Okay.
So that's sort of the thing to keep in mind, is that it's okay to use other things. It's okay to use a phone app or game to distract yourself from a craving and to pass the time and to help
Mhm.
you over a rough patch. But you just
Mhm.
don't want to be using it so much, so consecutively that you just develop a whole other problem.
That's awesome. Um, and I don't know why I just need to read this to you, but you wrote this as well. When bad behavior is ignored, you talk about people pleasing. And when you go to a family event and there's some bad behavior that the whole family their norm is to turn a blind eye to it, which I so relate to it. So when bad behavior is ignored for the sake of maintaining peace, there can be undercurrents and hidden feelings of betrayal. I was like, that's interesting. I don't know that I would have said betrayal, but okay. I had to think about that a little bit. People raised in this type of dynamic may smile and laugh on the outside, but feel hurt and confused on the inside. Often, humor is used to mask unkindness, and tolerating it is considered a strength. I felt like you were like bowling me into the boards with that one. I was like, oh my God, yes, that I relate to. And you talk about releasing yourself from old roles and giving yourself the permission. Well, you talk about having a bubble around you, right? That you operate through that contains your values that you hold dear.
Mhm,
So if being you mentioned kindness in your bubble, so you operate and you communicate through the lens of kindness, and the only goal at the end of the evening is, was I true to being kind in my interactions? Because that was the bubble that I had around me, was kindness. And I
mhm.
just thought that was genius, honestly. Now the bubble hour makes sense. I was like, okay, I get this. Um, and so being able to change your role or change your pattern in a dynamic that is not working for you.
That's a hard
Uh,
one.
that's
It's
a
a it's probably the hardest thing I worked on during this time, and that concept of the bubble came from my therapist, who
Mhm,
I went to and said, "Why do I turn into such a jerk when I'm around my parents and siblings?
mhm,
Like I'm really trying hard to be a good person. I feel like I'm really gaining ground, but the second I go to a family dinner, I turn into this person I don't like." And why is that happening, and how can I behave differently? And how do I make them meet me where I'm at?
yeah,
And so she explained, "Oh, no, no, that's okay. You got the right idea, but you're trying to go about it the wrong way."
right.
And so she said, "You're identifying that there's some old family contracts," is the words that she suggested I keep in mind. And so one of the family contracts, unspoken in my family, is that you must laugh at yourself. That's a sign of being of good humor and of not being too full of yourself, is that you can take a joke,
Mhm,
even if that joke is a little bit mean
mhm,
or a little bit hurtful,
mhm,
that it's a sign of dignity to be able to take a joke.
mhm,
And yet sometimes those jokes really hurt me. And also, I kept slipping into delivering these zingers, and expecting other people to take it. And that didn't feel good once that wasn't part of my core value anymore, that I really was getting in touch, that what I really valued, what really feels good to me, what really helps me stay authentic, is to be kind
mhm,
to myself and to others. And that if I use that as the filter for all of my interactions, that leaves me feeling comfortable.
mhm,
I don't need a drink all the time when I live my life that way.
mhm,
I mean, if we all just lived that way, that would change a lot.
mhm,
But for me, that really changed even just my ability to stay sober, because I
mhm,
didn't feel like all the time. And so, yeah, that's where that learning that dynamic came from. And so when I was at the family dinner, and instead of feeling like I needed to say, you guys, this is not good how you do this, you know. You think you're funny. Well, you're not. I mean,
Yes.
we kind of want to say that, but
Yeah.
that's not good either. I mean, that's not going to help anything. That wouldn't be kind,
Yeah.
right? So it
Right.
wouldn't even actually feel good for me to say that.
Yeah.
I mean, I might say that and feel like I was being true to myself and still leave feeling like a jerk and having looked like a jerk and then scratching my head, which is probably what was happening. It's probably why I brought it up with my therapist in the first place.
Mhm.
And so if we use this as a filter, this whatever your values are, I mean, your value might just be clarity.
Mhm.
You know, I love people that can just say with true clarity how they feel.
Mhm.
I don't have that in me. I'm a good communicator, but it's really ingrained in me to watch what I say.
Mhm.
So kindness came by very easily for me to
Mhm.
choose something that I could really um, process quickly and ask myself quickly, is this kind?
Mm.
So I think I talk about this in the book too, that when I was first learning that skill, I had gone to visit my parents and I had this plate of muffins. And as I was, driving over and going up to the door, I was thinking about, these are so good. And this is my own recipe. And my dad's really going to like these. And I was kind of imagining, him responding, like saying how good they were.
Yeah.
And then I had to stop and I stood on the doorstep and just took a couple deep breaths. And I thought, no, let all that go. You're here to be kind. Giving these muffins is kind. What they think of them does not matter. I have to release that expectation because
Yeah.
expectation is another big part of it.
Yeah.
And just do what I came to do, which is be kind by having a nice visit, being present, being generous. They could tip those muffins right into the bin
Yep.
and never eat them. It wouldn't change that I was kind.
So
Can't
how
take
do
that
you
away.
respond then if you go to your family of origin and they deliver a zinger, like a traditional one that everyone would laugh at, that isn't feeling very kind, and you
Right.
don't want to lecture them?
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah. So, okay, well, let's walk through that. What would be a kind response, right? The person is trying to be funny. They're trying to make themselves comfortable. So if you scold them or if you burst into tears, which if that's your authentic response, I mean, that's your right to do that. But
Mhm.
if you're really trying to be mindful in the response, I don't know, I'm making this up as I go. So
Oh, it's okay.
my
No, I'm curious.
my thought at this point where I'm at today would be to realize, oh, okay, well, they're not feeling that comfortable maybe either. They're trying to regulate their emotions by acting this way. So
Yeah.
if I'm going to be kind to them and kind to myself, you might say, that's a good one.
Okay.
You're funny.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't I don't like that though. So
Right. And you talk about in the book, like if you go to look for the feeling that someone's looking for, like go for
right,
the feeling instead of the behavior. So if you used to lead the conga line, this is an example in your book, what people loved about it wasn't that you were leading the conga line. They valued the engagement that invited. And so
right,
be engaging. You don't have to get
right,
drunk and lead a conga line. Just engage people in, and
right.
they'll
Make them
they'll
feel
love.
good about themselves.
Yeah. And so, when I think about, and I'm making this up as I go too.
This is how we roll.
On the
This is
spot. But I mean, if someone, I'm thinking, because every family of origin has this, right? Like, they deliver the same old zinger that I'm not finding that funny anymore.
yeah, yeah.
I see it
So can
differently.
we
And so,
pivot, right? Can we
yeah.
pivot from that? And can we say, oh yeah, oh, you're right. I am ditzy. Here's a story of something silly I did this week. Or, oh, that reminds me of a joke. Can you tell a benign joke where no one gets hurt? Because all people really want is to laugh. So I talk about this in the book too. Like, Google a few jokes before you go to a party.
Yeah.
Google the headlines, search, just have a few tricks up your sleeve so that you can pivot
Yeah.
and take the pressure off yourself, but also take the pressure off that other person because they're probably not trying to nail you to the wall. They're
No.
trying to engage in a way
Mhm.
that feels familiar.
Yeah.
And they might be on rote too.
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, you kind of have to give people the benefit of the doubt.
For sure.
It feels like they're trying to make you feel a certain way or put you back in your place. I'm the little sister.
Yeah.
So I simultaneously fall into the role of little sister and resent the role of little sister
Yeah.
at the same time. So I'm delightful to be around in those moments. So, so kind of resisting those patterns
Yeah.
and just, and you might have to step out of the room and,
Yeah.
go to the bathroom, wash your hands,
Yeah.
swish your mouth with some cold water and just think like, okay, how do I do this? What can I do
Yeah.
next?
I thought about it too. And I think that the next time there's a certain story that keeps coming up in my family that I just don't find funny anymore. And I thought, I might just ask, what does that story mean to you?
Yeah.
What are you trying to get at here? Like what do you think what are you illustrating with that story? And can we dig into that a little bit? But that's not necessarily a kindness response. It's a little, well, it's more my bubble, right? Which would be more, I think, there's compassion in it and curiosity and assume benign intent and check out your story. Because I think I know what they're getting at, but it probably isn't what they're getting at.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not so
And
much
if
about what
there's
an idiot
something
I
underneath
am.
it,
Yeah, it's more like an admiration for someone else in the story rather than me as the underdog in the story, So
but
it's like, okay, so let's
it's
get
like a
into that.
side effect is that you look bad or something, or it makes you
Yeah.
feel a certain way.
Yeah.
I think too that that's the kind of thing where maybe we don't deal with that in the moment. Maybe if that
Hmm.
keeps coming up and is bothersome, we seek out a private conversation another time that
Smart.
says, I know you mean well. I know you don't mean to hurt my feelings, but my inner gross meter just
Mhm.
goes way up when I hear
Mhm.
that story.
Yeah.
And you know what? Can we just agree to, if you can think of it, to not bring it up, or
Yeah.
if you see me do this,
Yeah.
like something that's kind to them, that
Yeah.
assumes and lets them off the hook a
Yeah.
little bit.
And that is kind. That is a very kind and smart, I think, response. So yeah, but you're right. I think I agree with you. Changing those old family dynamics can be one of the hardest things, and but it can be done. It can be
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
So, Jean, I'm mindful that I've had you on this call for an awfully long time, and so um, is there anything you want to promote or let people know before we sign off? I will have your how to find you, your books, your podcast links in the show notes, but is there anything else that you'd like in there?
Well, I do want to say that I do put every project that I'm doing is on my website.
Okay.
So I'm very active in creating new material. And as time goes on, my goal with this little Unpickled guide, Unpickled is the name of my blog. And so rather than write a big book of all the things I've learned in the last decade, I'm doing it topic by topic.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm releasing another book this year about early recovery and just the changes that we can make that help going alcohol free
Mm-hmm.
stick. So that one's coming out this year. And then there's a few more. So I do hope to have a nice collection by topic of these books. So check back on my website, which is jeanmccarthy.ca,
Okay.
and see what's been released lately, because you'll find it all there.
Perfect.
And the Bubble Hour, if you haven't listened to it before, there's 300 and I don't know, 40 or more episodes uh, up there. So hours and hours and hours of people telling their story. So I talk about myself on Unpickled, but on the Bubble Hour, I hold space for people like you to tell your story of what addiction and recovery meant to your family.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're going through it, there's nothing better than to hear from someone else. We learn from each other and we grow compassion by listening to each other.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. And yeah, I think I just want to offer compassion and inspiration and hope to anybody who's struggling and feels like they're up against something really hard. Probably what's happening is that a lot of the things that feel impossible are those old beliefs that you've internalized as true,
Mm-hmm.
that can actually be reshaped, and that's possible. And it's much easier to do when we're substance free. So
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I want people to be not ashamed. Let that shame go.
Hmm.
We've all got stuff.
Hmm.
And we need to be really kind and gentle with each other and with ourselves, and just keep moving forward. I hope I never stop learning and getting a little bit better every day. So
That's awesome, Jean. And thank you very much. Thank you very much for all the work that you've done and all the work that you're doing.
thanks.
I really, and for coming on the podcast, especially today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Friends, thanks for listening. And if you liked this episode, please be sure to click on the thumbs up below for YouTube and comment. What did you like most? And what do you want to hear more of? I'd love to hear from you. And in case you missed it, the website is maureentowns.com. Bye.